Greetings, I'm your host AVCF and welcome to the Loading Time Game channel. From the dawn of the video games until recent AAA hits like Rockstar's Red Dead Redemption 2, sheriffs and cowboys have long been dwelling on the gaming Far West. So in today's video I will highlight some classics of the genre, beginning in the late 70s and pointing out some 80s and 90s arcade and console classics. So let's dive in. Our journey begins in 1970, and despite the Wild West theme being obviously American, the first game in this genre is Japanese, Gunfight from Sega. This arcade of sorts is a glass box with a cute Wild West representation within, and there is even a good zillion there because of reasons, where two players duel against each other moving a gunman over a little rail. Considering that the microprocessor was yet to be invented, Sega did its best to deliver a Wild West experience. In 1975, Taito released its own Gunfight, and just as Sega did before, Gunfight features two-player gun duel, since it was not possible to play against a computer at the time. Still, Taito's Gunfight was a huge evolution on its own, as here the players could move their gunmen across the screen, obstacles such as trees, cactus, and even a carriage appeared from time to time, adding strategy to the duels. The matches were set to last 90 seconds, with the winner being the one who got more hits. Despite its primitive look and feel, Gunfight was a revolutionary game when it was released, as not only two players could play at the same time. According to the arcade's history, Gunfight was the first video game to feature a microprocessor, which allowed it to show such advanced graphic assets for the time. 1 year later, in 1976, Atari launched Outlaw for the arcades. I couldn't find any footage, and information about this arcade game is scarce, but it seems to be the first Wild West game to feature a light gun. 2 years later, Atari ported Outlaw for its Atari 2600 console, but redesigned it as a Gunfight clone. Anyway, it was the first Wild West game for a gaming console. In 1980, Nintendo went to the Wild West with Sheriff, released for the arcades. This time, going beyond a simple duel, the player had a task to defend a city from the surrounding bandits and save the girl. To do that, the player controls a sheriff that could shoot in 80 directions. Another interesting tidbit was that Sheriff was one of the first Shigeru Miyamoto works, responsible for the in-game sprites. In 1985, Nintendo returns to the Wild West theme with Wild Gunman, one of the launch titles for the NES that alongside Duck Hunt did use the NES Zapper. Wild Gunman was a simple shooting gallery, akin to the late 70s arcade games, just varying the number of in-game bandits on screen. At least it got a cartoonish sense of humor, with goofy-looking villains and even featuring a funeral march theme every time the player loses a duel. Still in 1985, Capcom launched Gunsmoke, a vertical scrolling shooter where the player controls a sheriff that must clean the West from waves of all sorts of bandits. Capcom blended the shoot-em-up mechanics with the Wild West theme, so the player's sheriff would get the typical shooter power-ups, like speed boosters, extra shoot range, and for the first time on the video games, it could mount on a horse. A boss showed up at the end of each stage, and the player would get a little nice animation after putting him down. Gunsmoke was ported to the NES in 1988, an excellent conversion by Capcom that smoothed the arcade's brutal difficulty and did a great job to adapt the arcade original mechanics to the NES. In 1990, the American Laser Games company tried to capitalize on the already falling market of full-motion video games, with its infamous Mad Dog McRae. Just like other FMV titles that came before, Mad Dog is just a bunch of quick-time events adjusted to munch as much quarters as possible, with terribly acted scenes rolling between the quote-unquote action sequences. Mad Dog McRae was later ported to a handful of platforms, but not even merging all of them would make Mad Dog a good game. In 1991, Konami launched one of its greatest arcade classics, Sunset Riders. chaos and fast pace of established powerhouses like Contra and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Sunset Riders had up to 4 players to cross several stages loaded with all sorts of bandits. Konami was not shy to adding lots of Hollywood western tropes into the game, like horse chases, locomotive assaults, battles against waves of Native Americans, a saloon boss battle, and of course, epic one-liners.
Marry me with my money.
Sunset Riders was later ported to the 16-bit consoles in 1993, with the SNES version standing out as the best conversion, being pretty faithful to the arcade original. You just can't miss with that. In 1994, Natsume launched its cult classic Wild Guns. By mixing up the Old West tropes with lots of steampunk elements, Natsume added its own coat of paint on the genre, putting its protagonists Clint and Annie fighting against giant robots, androids, flying machine gun drones, and so on. Wild Guns borrows its in-game mechanics from the old arcade game Cabal, with the player moving his character on left and right over straight line in the foreground, and at the same time shooting all kinds of stuff on the background with the aid of a crosshair. It seems something convoluted at first, but as soon as you get used to the controls, Wild Guns becomes an extremely fun sequence of challenges, even more fun when a second player is added into the mix. Another interesting little touch was the great attention given to the graphics, as even the teeniest title of the in-game backgrounds can somehow be affected by shots and explosions. Wild Guns was later remastered for the PS4, Steam and Nintendo Switch. I recommend you to play it wherever you can. As you could notice, the Cowboys have been doing for a long time in the game Wild West, and it's easy to say that given the popularity of the remastered Wild Guns and the huge sales figures of Red Dead Redemption 2, there's still much going on in the good old Wild West. So what do you think? So that's all for today. Thank you, and until the next time.
Marry me with my money.